2010s will probably go down in music history as the decade where rock music officially ceded its position as the groundbreaking genre that it once was, handing over the cultural reins to hip-hop and rap. No more were the kids with guitars the ones deciding the artistic pathway of the music industry. It was an age of DJs, star producers, and catchphrase-spewing hype men. It was also the decade where the market diversified itself so broadly that it nearly ceased to exist. The rise of iTunes in the 2000s had brought the single back to prominence, but with the rise of internet streaming services like Spotify in the 2010s, the album well and truly lost all relevance within the mainstream market. Now the attention was pulled more by the videos and by social media hashtags. Performers like Drake and Rihanna dominated the pop charts by putting out prolific amounts of singles and videos. Halfway through the decade, all the classic music icons started dropping like flies. Lou Reed, David Bowie, Prince, Aretha Franklin, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, Tom Petty, Glenn Frey, Maurice White, Scott Weiland, Chris Cornell, Rick Ocasek, and many, many more. Most of what came out in terms of pop music this decade, by which I mean traditional, mainstream, commercial pop music, it had a pretty frequent tendency of sounding samey a lot of the time. As such, it was kind of difficult to find enough really top-tier albums to fill up a list of what I would consider the top 10 albums of the decade. When I think of the 2010s, I think of a lot of synths, electronic beats, and half-mumbled vocals. The early half of the decade had a kind of disco revival fascination, which really came to a head in 2013, until trap hop and SoundCloud rap took hold of the reins by 2016. There were records that came out which sent massive shockwaves throughout the industry that I couldn't stand to listen to. Likewise, there were records that I thought were really brilliant which didn't even make a dent on the charts. So then how should I structure this list? Is it a purely subjective take on which records I felt were worth keeping in my rotation? Or should it be an acknowledgement of records and albums which were the most innovative and game-changing and are probably going to be the ones that last throughout the ages? I've decided to split the difference. So, for a record to have made it into the selection of the top 10 albums, it has to be a record I've listened to and have actively enjoyed listening to on repeat listens. However, in terms of their rankings on the list, I'm pushing the more idiosyncratic and personal choices toward the bottom placement, and leaving the records which I figure hold the most importance and historical weight. They are going to be the ones that are more on the top. So, anyways, let's get to the list. This is my top 10 albums of the 2010s. I couldn't in good conscience put this record any higher than number 10 without running the risk of critical nepotism. But truthfully, I really did like this record. The 2010s were not a decade of guitar riffs, and yet Idle Frames and Familiar Strangers are tracks I wanted to figure out on my guitar. I mean, hell, I've been using Someone New as the theme song for my YouTube show. Clearly, I like the record. Obviously, I could have given this slot to any number of more high-profile releases, but I'd be lying to myself if I didn't include What's Missing at least somewhere on this list. Beyoncé was one of the biggest pop stars of the last decade. Yet, for my money, her artistic blossoming didn't really begin until her self-titled album in 2013. Its follow-up, Lemonade, in 2016 got an even stronger critical reception. Yet neither of those albums ever really clicked for me in the same way that this live record does. The raw, visceral energy Beyoncé and her backing marching band deliver for 2 straight hours is just stunning, and solidifies her reputation as one of the most important artists of all time. I'm probably going to go into more detail about this record in a future review, and I already do have a written review out there, which I'll link into the description if you want more details. But suffice to say, I think this is going to be the record which solidifies her alongside the greats of pop music history. I'm losing my mind. All things told, I'd say McCartney's had a pretty strong decade. Very few pop artists are able to notch records in the top 10 by the time they're officially old enough to be called senior citizens. But the former Beatles' talent just simply can't be ignored. New, to me, is perhaps the closest we'll ever get to what a Beatles album in the modern age could sound like. It's one of Paul's most contemporary-sounding efforts, but not in a dated way like Press to Play, or in a desperate way like Egypt Station. Instead, with the guidance of Giles Martin, he shows how modern-day production flourishes could be combined with the classic pop songcraft that he is a master of to create a sound that's truly sensational. In my opinion, Annie Clark's ambitions have always been grander than her actual abilities. But on her self-titled effort from 2014, she managed to rise to the challenge and deliver a juicy piece of bluesy sci-fi art rock. A mixture of big star pop hooks and insecurity, filtered through a gauze of Berlin-era Bowie abstractionism and Rolling Stones-like swagger. There were a lot of pop divas who tried to make their grand liberation statement over the course of the 2010s. Adele conquered the charts twice with her soulful self-examinations 21 and 25. Ariana Grande tried using hashtags and musical co-opting for her Thank You Next. Folksy Taylor Swift tried throwing her hat in a ring with her pop transformation 1989 and nearly tanked her career with the abysmal Reputation. Katy Perry built her entire career off of her empowerment anthems until it became clear she wasn't sure who she was rebelling against anymore. Beyoncé made a whole movie about her pain and liberation. But for my money, no one pulled off the Freedom from Pain album with as much finesse as Kesha did with Rainbow. After a back catalog of records where she was sold and marketed as a trashy party girl by her physically abusive producer and label head, the mask comes off and the real Kesha is allowed the chance to truly show who she is and what she's capable of. The end result is far better than all the fake garbage that came before it, which plays into why Rainbow is a much stronger record than all of its competition. Its liberation is not only personal, but artistic as well. So listen up. The final album from the classic Vampire Weekend lineup, and their most lushly produced one at that. It's not buzzing off of as many hits as their earlier records, but it does feel like the culmination of a journey which by that point had lasted 7 years. A baroque rock classic to be. In the space between the 2013 disco revival and the arrival of trap rap in 2016, there was this odd space and time in the mid-2010s where alternative and indie rock came close to courting the mainstream again. Much of it was pretty twee and didn't prove to have a lot of staying power over time. Yet sliding in just at the tail end of that movement was Sometimes I Sit and Think and Sometimes I Just Sit. A record heavy on crunchy guitar riffs, thundering beats, and soaring choruses. Sure, it does have its fair share of twee moments, particularly the slower tracks like the Preston and the closing Boxing Day Blues. But then there's the overpowering sardonicism of Pedestrian at Best, and the growing blues catharsis of Small Poppies. And there's just simply no song in rock canon which has been able to capture the feeling of anxious, introverted indecision as perfectly as Nobody Really Cares If You Don't Go to the Party. It's a songwriting peak which Barnett has yet to match up to at this point. While there may have been more groundbreaking records in the indie genre which came out in the decade, at the time this album released it felt like a breath of fresh air. And in a way, it still does. In hindsight, The Life of Pablo set a very nasty precedent for how Kanye would treat his career throughout the rest of the decade. Gone were the accompanying short films, classy album artwork, and the trademark lavish production which set him apart from his contemporaries, and in its place were numerous release date delays, unfinished mixes, muddled ideas and concepts, and just a general sense of an artist losing his sense of direction. Eventually, it was these factors which led to the disappointing releases of Yay and Jesus is King. But on Life of Pablo, this slipshod approach to record making was intriguing. It was like getting an exclusive tour inside the troubled mind of a demented psyche. And this was a pretty demented psyche, even before all the other twisted shit that came later. Yet, even in its ugliness, there were moments of beauty to be found, like the opening gospel of Ultralight Beam, or the abrasive noise of Feedback. Even the novelty a cappella of the filler track I Love Kanye had something to offer, as in a sense it was the album's brief moment of self-aware clarity. A very plausible argument could be made that this record marks the beginning of Kanye's downward spiral, but to me, this is a successful experiment in musical catharsis, which delivers just enough jewels in the track listing to make it a worthwhile listen.
I need some water.
Okay, if this list was based purely off of artistic achievement and importance, this slot would most likely go to Pimp a Butterfly. But as previously mentioned, this is not a list of musical innovation or what was the most groundbreaking landmark achievement in, the history of recording, but what I personally found to be the most enjoyable listening experiences of the decade. And for as much as I appreciate and recognize To Pimp a Butterfly for being the landmark album that it is, I find Damn to be the more rewarding listening experience. It has song-for-song stronger beats, a greater amount of individual highlights, and is specifically designed to be listened to as an album piece, with a little bit of interactivity on the part of the listener. And that's pretty rare these days. You don't find a lot of people in the era of playlists and streaming making a record that is meant to be symmetrical and meant to be heard in two different fashions. The fact that Kendrick not only accomplished it, but did it with such widespread critical acclaim and commercial success, to the point where it won the Pulitzer Prize and went multi-platinum, it marked a moment where, for me as a listener, I conceded that hip-hop had now officially become the touchstone of a new genre, which will push the pop culture landscape forward into the future.
I'ma need to see your fucking hands at the concert. I'ma need to see.
Ain't it kind of funny how the record which would come to define the sound of pop music in the 2010s came out only 11 months into the new decade? And yet, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy ended up cementing itself as the benchmark of quality from which practically every genre in the pop music sphere tried to match over the next 10 years. It started a chain reaction where now practically every pop artist from Drake, Justin Timberlake, Jay-Z, Beyonce, Adele, Ariana Grande, Taylor Swift, Justin Bieber, Harry Styles, Mac Miller, and even Mike Posner began using their records and albums as self-reflections into their own psyches and personal growth, turning pop radio into an assorted collection of miniature therapy sessions. Even Kanye himself found it a hard album to surpass, allowing the demons which existed inside the themes of the record to eventually consume his mental stability, leading towards an ever-increasing fraying of his personality and an incomprehensibility within his music. Yet, for as much music as this album came to inspire, nothing quite was able to capture the beauty and the twisted darkness of this fantasy as harmoniously as Yeezy did here. The highlights still slam, even to this moment. The concert anthem Monster, the hard rock of Power, the soaring choruses of All of the Lights and Lost in the World, and the simultaneously fragile and horrific epic that is Runaway, as the opening musical shot of a decade which would come to be defined by its chaos, hypocrisy, and confusion. You couldn't have asked for a better soundtrack. So that's my list, and I haven't scripted this video from this point forward. The unannounced hiatus that I've been on these past few months is probably going to come to an end within the near future. I don't want to set any major statements of when videos will start churning themselves out again. I needed to take a break from making videos, and I just wanted to get this out before the year was over, so that way it was still somewhat relevant. There are new videos coming down the pipeline. There are new projects that are currently in the works. I will not lie, I am currently enjoying my break. I'm enjoying my vacation from making videos. But I will assure you that the channel, once again, still not dead. New content is coming. Just give me some time to catch my breath. But anyway, that's it, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.